This is a little gem of a 1930s council house. It's got cavity walls faced in expensively cut natural bath stone, and there's a clay pantile roof over the top. Not a great deal wrong with it, but enough to do a little episode on. There's a chimney over the party wall, and you can see the right side edge of the chimney got a fairly significant indentation in it, and that's probably because there used to be an aerial attached to it, so those aerial fixings will have been rubbing against it and doing a bit of damage. The tile covering's fairly good, but you can see where it joins the house next door, the two tile coverings are a little bit different, and there's a bit of a disjunction between the ridge tiles, and that's creating a little problem internally. There's a modern gutter and a modern downpipe, so that looks like it ought to be good, but there is potentially a bit of a residual problem which might have something to do with that internally, but I don't suppose there's any leaking from rainwater pipes now. And modern plastic soffits and fascias. The 1930s, they like to ventilate their walls, they like to ventilate the rooms indoors, so each bedroom will have a vent which goes through the wall, so there's permanent fresh air whether the window's open or not. Slightly curious idea these days, because obviously we want to keep our houses nice and warm, but there are those front and rear. There is a hint, well, it's a bit more than a hint, but that, I think, is an indication that there's cavity wall insulation. And there again, that's it too. And down the bottom, we can't actually see a damp-proof course, but there, just beneath the air brick, there's a much thicker mortar joint. So my guess is there's a double course of slates in there, overlapping slates, and there's a vent there to ventilate the timber ground floor. But that's fairly problematic too, because the floor at the back of the house is concrete, so we're only ventilating from the front, which isn't really going to work. In a long terrace like this, where it's a terrace of 6 houses, you might expect to find a couple of vertical thermal fractures, although I can't see any that I can positively identify as that, but no sign of other structural movement. The window sills at first floor level are straight and unfractured. The stone hood over the front door, there's no fracturing in it. And the lintel and window sill to the ground floor, no fracturing there either. And so I think there's no reason to suspect any structural movement in this property. The back of the house is somewhat disappointing. The walls are in good structural condition, I mean there's no real problem there, but there have been various bits of repair, maintenance and alteration which have been done rather badly. Just as I digress a little bit, there are those two vents at the top of the walls there ventilating the back bedrooms as discussed earlier. This is the rear elevation over the conservatory, and we've got well, a very large hole in the wall. So someone's obviously moved, I presume, judging from that collection of pipes there, a toilet soil pipe, and someone started to cut a hole next to it, and up above there are two small waste pipe holes of some description. But one of the problems with putting a conservatory this large across the back of your house is you've now got no access to the upper wall for maintenance, and I think that's probably why that's all been neglected. But what we do have there, quite clearly, is a great big hole in the wall. And inside, same again, this is the back of the kitchen, and you've got a couple of holes there unnecessarily left as they are. Does mean you can check for cavity wall insulation, and from those holes it is possible to identify some sort of fluffy blown cavity insulation. The conservatory roof is yellowing, so this is some kind of polycarbonate, isn't it? And what's the theory? That is it ultraviolet light causes plastics to disintegrate? So that material's slowly going to go yellow and then black, and then it will become brittle and split and disintegrate. This edge here, from the outside, the impression I get is those, what are they called, rafters are they? The end covers have come off, and there's one over there which has been replaced with a brown one which has come off again too. But the worst thing about this conservatory is this. What we've got there is a window opening, and the elevation, well, they've cut the windowsill, which seems to be a little bit unnecessary. It's just basically in the wrong place, isn't it? So you've bisected a window opening. Clumsy, careless, poor. There's the other side of it. No chance of maintenance and repair. You can't get in there. They put plasterboard over it on the inside, so no insulation. Just rubbish, really. A relatively minor point, there's a couple of vent covers missing to the soffits there. Well, minor, you're going to get birds in there nesting. Great if you're a sparrow though, I suppose. This is the front wall to the house, inside the front wall. We know it's got cavity walls, it's got a damp-proof course, so it shouldn't be damp, but you can see, well, a sort of brown smudgy patch. That over there looks a little bit odd too. And if we stick a damp meter in it, I mean, there's not much arguing about that. But it's not going up the wall, is it? So why is it damp down there? And come over to this side. This side, it's a bit all over the place. So you've got the same sort of smudging, but the damp meter seems to be quite happy here and here. But not there. So what's the problem? The walls look okay, there is a damp-proof course, there's a bit of clearance between the ground and the damp-proof course. So possibly it's the cavity wall insulation that's sort of acting as a bridge, a sort of critical mass of moisture migrating up the wall, running down the wall, rainwater that is, and then of course it's a soft limestone which can be relatively porous anyway, so maybe all this moisture somehow migrating across the cavity because of the cavity fill and possibly the junk that was in the bottom of the cavity already. Tricky one. This is potentially a weak point because we've got a timber floor here and a concrete floor here. But I did probe down there and that is dry. And at the back of the house, that's where the window is that's been plasterboarded over in that very clumsy manner. And the wall down here is now bridged by the floor to the conservatory. The damp-proof course is bridged by the floor to the conservatory, and we know it's got cavity wall insulation. So let's see what happens. Again, that's getting rather excited, but it doesn't seem to be migrating up the wall in any meaningful way. So I think I might have to be saying something to my customer along the lines of, you're going to have to live with it and see how it develops, and then perhaps do something about it later on. Doing something about it might involve clearing out the cavity fill, but that would be difficult. And here's the roof. There is the roof ridge, and the rafters are all nicely fitted to the roof ridge. Bit of leftover underlay from the old days, and a great big purlin spanning from one side to the other with no struts providing intermediate support. What we do have though is 3 collars tying the roof together from side to side, a function which will be repeated down there by the ceiling joists, if only we could see them. And we've got these timbers here. I mean, what are these? Are these sort of hangers? Are they pulling the roof down? Is that the theory of those? There's 3 of those each side. And there's the extreme left end of the roof ridge, where there's that bit of a disjunction between the ridge tiles to each side of the party wall. So there's a bit of light getting in there. So that will probably lead to the early deterioration of that underlay. So that's a bit of a weak point. And here we have a trail of dust, or several trails of dust on the purlin, which hinted a woodworm infestation, or rather an active woodworm infestation. And there we can see it's had woodworm, quite a lot of it. But usually you get nice little clean trails of dust. This is all a bit messy, so I wonder whether that's just old frass blowing around. But I suppose there's a little piles of it perhaps coming out the tops of those holes. I think there's enough evidence there to suggest we've probably got an active woodworm infestation here. And there's a modern air permeable underlay so that we know it has been re-roofed recently. And a load of redundant plumbing over there. That's me nearly falling over by standing on a loose board. Lastly, what are the ceilings made of? It's 1930s, could well be lath and plaster. Let's have a look. There, hang on, there we go. Pull back the insulation, and that's a lath and plaster ceiling. Lots of bits of plaster broken off the top side. So where it's broken off the top side, of course, you see this here is the plaster oozing through the laths and hooking itself on. So where it's all broken off like this, it's no longer hooked on anymore. So this stuff underneath is going to be quite loose now, so this ceiling is relatively vulnerable to collapse. And having said that, that looks like the top of a piece of plasterboard. So I think the ceiling, this has come off, it's been knocked off, hasn't it? The ceilings have been pulled down, but they used to be lath and plaster. So there are the ceiling joists going side to side, pulling the feet of the rafters together. And then here we've got a ceiling joist binder, some unused Christmas crackers as well for somebody to find later in the year. So ceiling joist binders are providing a bit of lateral bracing to the structure. We know from within the roof space that some of the ceilings have been replaced with plasterboard, but that diagonal crack there and another one over there, don't know whether you can see it, are very reminiscent of lath and plaster fracturing. So I think there's a mixture of plasterboard and lath and plaster in this house now. That's the front bedroom wall, and there's no sign of air ventilation here. So whilst there are vents at the top of the bedroom walls outside the house, they're not doing any ventilating internally now, they're being plastered over. The windows are showing their age. This one quite clearly has failed double glazing to it. This is the bathroom window, which is a bit rusty. Hinges are a bit rusty, and it won't close now either, so that requires some attention. And it's also got failed double glazing as well. Plenty of ventilation though from a window which doesn't close. This is the rear right corner of the first floor of the property, where there is an indication of dampness. But I can't see any good reason for dampness externally. There's new gutters, there's a good eaves overhang, there's no downpipe there. The masonry is in good condition, so this is one of those occasions when you just have to say, I don't know. Maybe it's sort of a collection of hygroscopic salts in the plaster that are giving a reading now when the actual source of the moisture has ceased to be a problem. There's probably a wardrobe in there, creating a condensation problem behind it, but yeah, I don't really know why that's damp now, and I did poke it with a damp meter, which got a bit excited. We know from the roof that this is a brick party wall. There's a wood chip paper finish to it, and that sounds very solid. Here sounds very hollow, so I think if somebody decides they don't like that wood chip and decides to strip it off, they'll probably pull a lot of plaster away with it, so probably a partial replastering will be required. Well, to summarise, a nice little house, been re-roofed, might well need to have the cavity fill taken out if that turns out to be a problem, and lots of nuisance repairs required around a badly built, badly conceived conservatory at the back of the property.